What's up, my true crime family? And welcome back to another week on Guns and Butter with your favorite cousin, Kinda G. Y'all, welcome back to the dinner table. It feels so good to be back here with y'all. Listen, cousins, I had to skip last week because I just had too much going on. First of all, I was trying to keep up with the Netflix series Monsters that everybody had been talking about with the Menendez brothers. So, y'all already knew I was going to jump on the train and see what Netflix did to the story. And on top of that, I was being lazy, procrastinating, and doing everything but sitting up here and recording. So, sue me, okay? But enough of all of that. We've just entered the best month of the year. And I don't mean it's the best month out of the year specifically for true crime because I can tell y'all all these spooky, creepy, murdery stories because of Halloween. No, forget Halloween. This is my month. So not only is this my birthday month and the best month out of the year, but this is also the year that I turned 30. So with that being said, I'm gonna make sure I turn up extra hard for y'all this month. So to kick off October, I'm gonna be giving you guys spooky stories all month long. So without further ado, I know y'all missed me as much as I missed you. Let's dive right into October's very first Fright Fest case. Listen, murder me? Okay. But please don't chop me up into tiny pieces and spread my body parts all over the city.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
This week at the dinner table, I'll be telling y'all about the murder of 40-year-old Mary Stetson. Mary was born July 24th, 1958, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She was said to have a vivacious and bubbly personality, like she was the life of the party. And she was a single mother to 5 children, whose ages ranged from 9 to 24. And her oldest daughter, Tamara, actually lived right across the street from her. And at the time of this story, she had been separated from her husband or ex-husband for about 10 years now. And in order to support herself and her kids, she was working the night shift at a factory assembly line for a cable company. And while she did enjoy every moment she got to spend with her kids, she also enjoyed being a free spirit and going out on the town, having a couple drinks, and really enjoying herself. And when she did just so happen to go out, like I said, she was the life of the party. Everybody would notice her and everybody loved her. She was beautiful, tall, thin, and people were just drawn to her. But in the summer of 1999, Mary's fun, free-spirited days were cut short when she was murdered and dismembered. Mary was living in the classic New England town of Manchester, New Hampshire. And some people know Manchester because it's best known as the location of the first presidential primary. And if you don't know by that, you may know Manchester because its main attraction is Elm Street. So Elm Street is known for being the longest street in America, and it has dead ends on either end. And according to the locals, Elm Street is said to have spirits that lurk in the old buildings and the streets of this historic city. So on Sunday night, July 18th of 1999, Mary had the night off from work, and it's Sunday fun day, so why not? So she decided she wanted to let loose and have a little fun before she had to head back to work for the week. So her oldest daughter, Tamara, comes over to watch the younger kids, and she starts getting ready for a date with a man named Daryl at around 5:30. Now she and Daryl had been out once before, but this time he didn't show up. But Mary wasn't the waiting around type, so she decided to go out by herself. She calls herself a cab, and she heads to downtown Manchester to one of her favorite bars called Flo's. And after being gone for only about 15 minutes, the doorbell rings. Tamara answers it, and it's Daryl. He tells her the reason why he was running late was because he got lost. But Tamara tells him that her mom had already left for the evening, and if he wanted to still meet up with her to maybe check out the bar Flo's. Now, telling Daryl where her mom was a decision that she would later regret when her mom did not come home that night. And not only did she not come home, but she didn't call or make any contact with her daughter, which wasn't like her. And by Monday morning, Tamara was worried half to death, and things only got worse later that night when she found out her mom never showed up to her 10 o'clock shift that night at work. So she didn't want to waste any more time. She went ahead and called the Manchester police to report her mom missing. So when the call comes in about one of the locals, Mary Stetson, being missing, a well-experienced officer by the name of Sergeant Scott Fuller hears the call and he makes sure he gets all the details. She's a black female, about 5'7", 135 pounds. She wore glasses, had dark hair and brown eyes, and she had very distinguishing tattoos, one of which was on the back of her right shoulder, and it read her name, Mary. And in this small town where not a lot of crime happens, Fuller just knew that he would be able to bring Mary home safely. And no sooner than he received the missing person call, 2 days later on July 20th, he gets an urgent call from dispatch. A man by the name of Steve Barlow, who was walking along the Piscataqua River when he made a disturbing discovery at a popular swimming hole. He saw a duffel bag about 40 yards away, bobbing up and down in the water, and it was also caught onto the dam. So he curiously was able to retrieve this duffel bag from the water. But when he unzipped it, he could not believe his eyes. He had just found a dead body. So when Fuller hears this call come in, he immediately leaves the station and heads towards the river. Once he gets there, it's already chaotic. There's police everywhere. But when he takes his first peek inside the duffel bag, his jaw drops when he sees what Steve actually discovered. So, as we'd already figured out, this duffel bag was concealing a dead body, but not the type of dead body the caller had described. Fuller was standing there looking at only a woman's torso. And after examining the torso, he discovers a tattoo on the right shoulder, and he realizes that it says Mary, the same Mary whose daughter had just reported her missing only hours before this. So officers fan out and search the scene for more evidence, but with only a torso and being in a town that hardly sees any murders, the homicide team's first step was to notify Mary's family. So detectives start off by asking her family about Mary's last night alive. And while her daughter doesn't have a whole lot of details about her date who showed up late, the man named Daryl, she is able to give them a description. And she describes him as being a white man, slender and built, maybe in his 20s, and he has short spiked blonde hair with blue eyes. So the police go ahead and work up a composite sketch and they send it out to all the local media, hoping that Daryl would come forward and explain his side of things. But as more time passed, Daryl never came forward, which raised more suspicion for authorities. So even though Daryl wasn't coming forward, the police didn't want to hone in on one specific person just yet. So of course there is this big possibility that people seen Mary at the bar last night. So while detectives hope that Daryl will turn up, they go ahead and hit up the local bars and they start asking questions. And they were also able to locate the cab records that showed Mary getting picked up from her house on Kimball Street and being taken to Flo's Bar on Lake Ave. So while at Flo's Bar, the police go ahead and start handing out pictures of Mary. And several witnesses did confirm seeing Mary, but they couldn't recall who exactly she was with. And along with Flo's Bar, they head across the street to Mike's Pub and Grub, which is a popular bar that the locals frequent as well. And thankfully, one of the witnesses did see Mary at Mike's Pub and Grub that night. They described her as being with a white man with shorter length, light brown hair, and he looked to be maybe in his 40s. So after hearing this description, they're like, okay, so Daryl is described as being in his 20s and having blonde hair. So if Daryl didn't catch up with Mary that night, then who did? And nobody they spoke with was able to identify the person Mary was with. Now, this particular man had been seen at the bars before, but nobody knew him by name. And to top it off, nobody had ever seen he and Mary together besides on this night. But aside from all of that, it did appear that the two of them were enjoying themselves together. This unknown man was even generous enough to buy Mary a $5 souvenir, a one-eyed teddy bear, from a street vendor that night. Now, even though this is 1999 and credit cards and plastic was coming into use, these two particular bars didn't have the capability of accepting credit cards at this time, so everybody just paid with cash for their drinks. So, with that being said, it made it even more difficult to establish who was using what and who paid for what, and in this case, who was paying for the drinks with Mary that night. And before police could figure out who Mary was with, her autopsy report came in. Although the coroner only had a partial body, he was able to come to several conclusions. Thankfully, there was no evidence of sexual assault, but she had been stabbed 12 times, suggesting that there was a lot of violence and a lot of rage behind her death. Then her killer took it steps further in order to not get caught by then chopping her body up with a saw, removing her head and limbs, making it 10 times harder to identify who she was. So at this time, they needed to figure out who this unknown, dark-haired man was who Mary was with at the bar. And again, where is Daryl? Some days later, Daryl finally shows up at the station. He identifies himself as Mary's date, but the police want to know if he didn't have anything to hide, then why did it take him so long to come forward? So he apologizes and explains that he didn't have anything to do with Mary's murder, so he kind of just wanted to stay away from it. But he does tell police that Mary's daughter did point him in the right direction. He did go downtown and he did see Mary at the bar that night. In fact, he was actually able to spot her very quickly, thanks to a popular hat that she liked to wear. This was the same hat that she had worn a couple nights before when they had went out on their first date. And although he did want to approach her, he kind of held back because Mary wasn't alone. He continues on by saying that he saw Mary and a guy leaving Mike's Grub and Pub walking west on Leon Lake Ave. And he describes this man to be white with shoulder-length brownish blonde hair. He says that this wasn't a huge deal to him, so he continues to socialize and drink for the night, and he ends his night over at a friend's house. Now, while police have nothing to tie Daryl to Mary's murder, and he has a squeaky clean record, they aren't ready to clear his name just yet. So in the meantime, Mary's daughter Tamara comes forward with another name for police, and it's a local shopkeeper by the name of Greg Ho. She tells him that he's someone she remembers her mom complaining about recently. So upon doing a little bit of digging, they find out that Greg owned the corner store market, and Mary would go to this store on a daily basis. And not only that, but a couple of Mary's kids would also help out at this store doing odd jobs from time to time. So Tamara says that the Friday before her mom went missing, there was an incident involving Greg and her 16-year-old sister. She says that her 16-year-old sister tells Mary that Greg had inappropriately hit on her and he kissed her on the neck. And rightfully so, Mary was pissed. So she planned to confront Greg later on that evening. And Tamara, thinking to herself when her mom confronted Greg about this incident, her mom wasn't going to keep a cool head about it. She was going to lay into him and give him a piece of her mind. And coincidentally, she was going to confront him the Sunday she went missing. But police want to know if Mary even had the opportunity to confront Greg about this. So not wanting to take any chances, the police catch up with Greg at his market. Greg does confirm Mary came by the market at around 6 that Sunday evening she went missing. And he says that when she came into the store, she bought a case of beer and they had some small talk. He insists that she was her usual friendly self and she didn't bring up anything about her daughter whatsoever. But the police doubt that was the case. So they cut to the chase and ask him if he did kiss Mary's daughter. But he nervously dances right over their question. Now in his mind, he doesn't know exactly why he's being questioned. So he was being really vague with his answers and kind of glossing over what he wanted them to know. But the investigators keep digging, and they ask him what he did with the rest of his evening. He goes on to tell them that he stayed at work. He closed up the shop, and then he went home. Now his alibi ended up checking out, and he seemed to be telling the truth about everything. So just as the detectives are about to head out the door, Greg suggests that they speak to an employee of his by the name of Eric Kinney. Greg tells police that Eric was working the Sunday Mary came in. In fact, he swears he saw Eric flirting with Mary this night. So when they catch up with this Eric man, he agrees to come in for questioning. He tells him that Mary did come into the store around 6 o'clock that evening, but she had left after purchasing her six-pack. He does go on to tell him that they had a little conversation and there was some flirting that happened during this conversation, and she asked him if he was going to be by the store later on that evening, suggesting that she possibly wanted to meet up with him later on. So Eric says that Mary promised that she would stop by around 10 and they could have a drink then. So Eric was looking forward to seeing Mary later. So when he got off his shift at around 8, he stuck around for another 2 hours waiting for Mary. And based off their conversation from earlier, he was kind of expecting to see her that night. However, she never came back to the store. Now, they do confirm his alibi, and at this time, they have no leads on who Mary's killer could be. About 2 weeks after the discovery of Mary's body, the police receive a phone call from a woman who was looking for her ex-husband. Now, they describe this woman as sounding a little bit disoriented, maybe a little bit loopy, but dispatch tried to get as much information out of her as they could about her missing ex-husband. She tells them that he hadn't been around in the past couple of weeks, and this was very unusual for them to not have any contact with one another. She continues on by saying she went over to his apartment to look for him, and when she got there, she found a couple of items missing from his apartment that were very unusual and that could possibly be connected to the case they're working. But before police could take her name down, she hangs up. But luckily for the investigators, this woman calls back the next morning. And this time, she's speaking more clearly and she's ready to talk. She tells him her name is Donna Plick and her ex-husband's name is Vaclav Plick. She explains that Vaclav is an immigrant from Czech, which is a country in Europe. He's about 40 years old. They'd been married but since divorced. And although she was his ex-wife, they still kept in touch quite frequently. But Donna goes on to say that it's been about 2 weeks since she's last seen or heard from him. And this was unusual and she's starting to get a little bit worried. But since she had read about Mary's brutal murder, she'd had a strange feeling that maybe he actually had something to do with it. And she says there's something a little strange about his disappearance that may have something to do with the connection to Mary's murder. But she does go on to mention his violent history and how he had assaulted her multiple times in the past. And then she throws out there that he would tell her things like he would cut her up into pieces. And since he had recently lost his job, he had been drinking heavily. And overall, Donna just had this weird feeling that Vaclav was going to go back to his old violent ways. Then she drops a bombshell on the investigators, telling them what he used to do for a living. She says he used to work for a company deboning chickens and other meat products, so he was a damn butcher, meaning he was real familiar with knives and how to cut things up. But wait, y'all, there's more. Donna says that when she went looking for Vaclav at his apartment, she noticed a few odd things about his place. You see, he had this knife that he always carried around with him, and that was missing from the apartment. And based upon what they're looking into for this murder, she felt that was something they needed to know. And she also pointed out that the carpet was missing in his bedroom, like there was a large section that had been cut out. The last thing she tells detectives is that Vaclav is an active fisher, and then she describes where he usually goes to catch his fish. And this just so happens to be the exact area where Mary's body was found. So with all of this newfound information, detectives immediately start their search for Vaclav. But in the meantime, another call comes into the station that turns his case in another direction. A man who knew Mary by the name of Josh Kendall notifies the authorities claiming they should look into a guy who goes by the name Slim. He describes him as being a hothead who has a thing for sharp objects. So the caller Josh says that this guy Slim had a couple of sharp knives and he was frequently seen carrying them around. Josh says when he learned about Mary's death, he thought that he should tell police what happened about a week before she died. He tells them that the three of them, he, Mary, and Slim were at a party a couple weeks ago, and Mary started flirting with Josh or taking a liking to him, and Slim took offense to this. So instead of leaving the situation alone, Slim decided he was going to take matters into his own hands, and he starts attacking Josh. Now, while Josh was able to fight Slim off, Slim was pretty mad about being rejected by Mary. So Josh is thinking that maybe Slim, who had a thing for knives, got his revenge on Mary by killing her and cutting her up with his knives. So with this weird story, Josh isn't able to give a government name for Slim. And not just that, but he tells him that Slim may be homeless right now. It's now been 3 weeks since Mary's murder, and the police currently have 2 suspects in their sights. The first one, who is a former butcher who is now mysteriously missing, and the second one is an angry drifter who goes by the name of Slim. And police have finally tracked this Slim guy down. So they track Slim down at a homeless shelter in the city of Concord, New Hampshire, which just so happens to be right along the river where Mary's body was found. But when detectives arrive at this camp, they find Slim sleeping in his makeshift tent. And he seems a little surprised, maybe even a little confused as to why he's being questioned right now. But he's cooperative, and he tells them his name is Rick Mercer. And during the questioning, he does admit to getting into a little bit of a disagreement with Josh. But he insists he didn't lay a finger on Mary. So he allows the police to search his tent, and they don't find any knives or any evidence that may indicate that he had anything to do with Mary's murder. And given his calm, laid-back demeanor, police are finding it hard to believe that he even assaulted Josh at this said party. And on the Sunday Mary was murdered, Slim gives an alibi saying that he was at his friend's house during that long weekend, and his alibi checked out. And with Slim crossed off their list, they only had one more person to look into. So they finally turned their focus to Vaclav Flick. So to kick off their search for Vaclav, Donna brings in a photo of him, and investigators think that there's a good chance that this sandy-haired man who witnesses seeing Mary with the night at the bar could possibly be this same guy. So they start off by getting a search warrant to see if they can find anything suspicious in his apartment. So along with the forensics team and detectives, they make their way over to Vaclav's 1-bedroom apartment. Now, upon first glance of his living room, initially nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, behind the closed doors of his bedroom, investigators find this missing chunk of carpet Donna had told them about. And all of his fishing gear was scattered around his bedroom, and the bag that usually carried all of his fishing gear was missing. Now, the rest of the apartment didn't look like he was doing any type of renovations, but the carpet in his bedroom looked like it had been deliberately cut out. And on top of that, there were some fibers that had a red tint to them that had been recovered from the floor. And this big-ass missing chunk of carpet suggested that someone obviously tried to cover up a crime scene. Then, something else catches the investigator's eye. In the center of a small, neatly made twin bed is a black straw hat. And Mary was described to have been wearing this exact hat by both her family and by people who saw her at the bar. And on the shelf behind Vaclav's bed, investigators find that for a grown man, he has some very interesting keepsakes. The investigators discovered a number of stuffed animals in Vaclav's bedroom, where they believe the crime actually took place. And one stuffed animal in particular stood out to them the most because this was said to be the exact teddy bear that he had bought for Mary from the street vendor. And they know it was the same bear because this bear only had one eye. So as the forensics team dust for fingerprints and they search for any type of blood splatter evidence, they of course spray the room with luminol. And the room lit up like a Christmas tree. There was traces of blood everywhere, on the walls, on every piece of the bed, flooring. I mean, it was everywhere. And as the team is collecting more DNA evidence, they make another shocking discovery in Vaclav's closet. They find a large handheld saw. So all the evidence from his apartment was sent off to the lab for testing. And not surprisingly at all the evidence came back confirming what they already knew. The blood belonged to Mary. On August 10th, 1999, about 3 weeks after Mary's body was discovered, raggedy-ass Vaclav Plick was finally located in Austin, Texas. He was apprehended and arrested for Mary Stetson's murder. And while he was being arrested, investigators go ahead and search his car. And in his trunk, they find a pair of pants with traces of blood. And they find a bloody stain in his back seat. And after later testing, the blood was confirmed to be Mary's. But he was originally charged with second-degree murder. And while he was being questioned, he was on mute. He didn't want to talk to the investigators, and he requested an attorney. But eventually he breaks, and he confesses to murdering and dismembering Mary's body. But after about a good 2 days of talking to this man, they go ahead and up his charges from second-degree to first-degree murder. And on November 14th, 2000, about a year and a half after Mary's death, Vaclav is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Okay, so based off of Mary's injuries, the 12 stab wounds to her chest, the confession from Vaclav, and all the evidence collected from his apartment, the investigators were able to piece together what they believe happened to Mary the night she was killed. So it all started when Mary meets Vaclav at Mike's Pub and Grub. The two of them share a couple of drinks, enjoy a couple of laughs, and after a few hours of getting acquainted at the bar, Vaclav invites Mary back to his apartment. She agrees to go back to his place, but at some point he tries to have sex with her. But after declining his passes and getting uncomfortable enough to say she's ready to leave, the rejection just didn't sit well with Vaclav. Now, he did describe to detectives that he had blacked out after drinking heavily and after taking 2 white pills Mary had given to him. So in a drunken rage, he stabs Mary 12 times in her chest with one of his fishing knives. And after that, he passes out. But the next morning when he wakes up, the aftermath of his rage is still in his bedroom, laying dead at the foot of his bed, in the exact spot where he'd cut the carpet out. And at this point, he describes her as being cold and blue. He then drags her body to the bathtub, and he realizes that he has to dispose of her body so that nobody will find her. He grabbed the saw that he kept in his closet. He dismembered her head first, then her arms and legs. He then wrapped her body parts in brown paper and placed them in plastic trash bags. Once dismembered, he then placed her torso in the duffel bag where he kept his fishing gear. He then drives to the Piscataqua River where he fishes, and he dumps her torso into the water. On his way back to his apartment, he tosses the rest of Mary's remains in the woods on the other side of town. Oh, goodness. Well, that's the end of this week's case. This one really got under my skin because along with all of my other cases, it's like, why? Like, why do you have to take somebody's life? Why do you have to go to the extreme to cut them up so that their families don't have a complete body to bury? Now you have to spend the rest of your life behind bars, all because you can't accept no for an answer. Get out of here. But family, I hope y'all enjoyed this week's case, my very first Fright-tober fest. I don't know what I'm gonna call it yet. I'll let y'all know next week. But as usual, I'll see you guys same place, same time next week. And leave me a review on whatever platform you're listening on and let me know what you think of the cases I'm covering.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.